Back to My Garden, episode 54.
Welcome to Back to My Garden. Discover your passion for gardening. Here's Dave Ledoux.
This just in, my top 20 favorite garden writers, and they're all women. www.backtomygarden.com/top 20 garden writers. Attention garden lovers. Do you want to save time, save money, and have your most incredible garden ever? Get free tips, strategies, and gardening techniques from wonderful gardeners around the world. Join the VIP club for free today at www.backtomygarden.com/VIP. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world when you listen to this. I'm Dave Ledoux, and welcome to another edition of Back to My Garden. I'm excited to talk to you today. On this episode, we have a special guest. Janet is a food and agriculture marketing strategist, a certified master food preserver. This is going to be so good. A baker, a cooking class instructor, and host of a spectacular dinner parties, joining us from Delaware, Ohio. Please welcome to the show, Janet Cassidy. Hi, Janet.
Hi, Dave. How are you?
I'm excited because I love to talk about gardening, but I love the eating side of the equation even more.
Me too.
I've given you a brief overview, like an introduction, but I want to hear your story, and I'm sure our listeners want to get to know you as well. Janet, can you take a minute or two and share with our listeners a little bit about your background and how you got into gardening?
Sure. I have an agricultural background. My grandparents actually had a grain farm that I spent a lot of time on. And then my parents had an apple orchard, so I grew up in the apple orchard. And so really I was sort of immersed in food production my whole life. And because we had those sort of large plots of land, it was never a problem to say, hey, can I have this spot over here to dig up? And so I had access to tools and land to till up, and a real support and no surprise, I think, from the family that would interest me. And so really I've been sort of raised in this culture of food production, and so gardening just seemed like a natural progression.
Fantastic. Now, Janet, you and I are going to get to visit here and chat, but we have listeners driving in their cars, and we want them to be safe. So don't worry about taking notes. I'll put all the links and resources in the show notes at Back to My Garden. And make sure you check out Janet's website. It's www.jansjars.blogspot.com. And you can follow her on social media on Twitter at Janet Cassidy. Share her content. Let her know that she can reach out and ask questions. But Jan's Jars, I have a feeling we're going to be talking a lot about that today. Where to start, Janet? Can you talk to me a little bit about your first garden as a grown-up?
Sure. That was probably 30 years ago, so I'll try to remember back that far. I think my first garden was really pumpkins. Pumpkins are beautiful to look at and exciting to carve, and so I've always been an enthusiastic fan of Halloween. And so I think early on I started with just pumpkins. Doesn't need a whole lot of talent to grow pumpkin, respectfully to all the pumpkin growers out there. But it was an easy thing to start with. And I think my biggest challenge that year was groundhogs.
Oh, I know one simple way or two simple ways to take care of groundhogs, but did you have a strategy are you?
They're wily, those things. They don't look smart, but they are. And so I was especially taken by sort of the Big Max pumpkins, the really big pumpkins, which could endure some gnawing on and recover. And so really I that first year I endured it. I put up with their bites here and there, knowing that those pumpkins would recover and just have scar marks and still be good carving pumpkins. But then the next year we got a little savvier with some live traps, and maybe not some live traps as well.
Mm-hmm. My wife sent me a YouTube of a pumpkin grower who grows the big ones, and he took a photograph every 2 hours using a stop motion camera from the day he planted it to the day they had the crane take it away on a skid. It's great. I'm going to post it on the blog here.
I'll have to look for that.
Yeah. My neighbor's a pumpkin farmer, and they have a big problem with deer in the fall because the deer just, I guess it's like candy to them, so they just walk out in the field and smash it with a hoof and eat the insides. Have you ever grown like one of those ridiculous to put in a fair, like 500 pounds or 1,000
Well,
pounds?
I've tried. How about that? Which is not to say we actually got big enough to participate in the fair. I think the challenge for me was the moving piece of that. You know, you can't just shove that in your trunk. And so the challenge is really the front end loader, moving it to a truck that's big enough to facilitate that, which I never grew one that wouldn't fit in a truck. I did grow ones that just about needed a front end loader. And so for us, if I could get it up to the front yard to carve, that was success. Trying to wrangle, you know, straps and belts to get it to the fair was never that much of an interest to me. I was pretty proud of myself if I could get a carved pumpkin out of, you know, a handful of seeds.
Nice. For those of you listening, if you have any access to award-winning pumpkins and or pumpkin chunking, and if you don't know what pumpkin chunking is, it's when I'm pretty sure it's an American phenomenon, but they build giant cannons and shoot pumpkins a quarter mile, and then they put it on TV shows, and there's fairs and contests for pumpkin chunking. If you know that, drop me a line on the blog. I want to interview a pumpkin chunker. So you started on pumpkins. We got off topic already. We got to get back to the food element. I know you're really busy on the work side of agriculture and gardening now, but did you get to garden this year? And what was your garden like?
I did garden this year. So we had a unusually wet early summer that left part of our garden underwater for maybe 2 weeks. And so some things rebounded and other things didn't so well. So we've got maybe an acre plot of garden, plus we've got a smaller, handful of fruit trees and fruit bushes. That larger plot sort of sits in some clay soils, and we're thinking about how to address that in the future. But we had a not so awesome tomato yield, and usually that's the one thing we can count on is really bushels of tomatoes that we didn't get this year. So in terms of the preservation piece of it, we're definitely low on things like salsa, but that's sort of how the garden goes. And so we didn't get red tomatoes. We got a ton of tomatillos. They're much more vigorous or resilient, I guess is a better word, to not so favorable growing conditions. So those did really well this year. Our pumpkins did pretty well. Instead of growing large pumpkins, we're now I am always on a trek to find a new good pie pumpkin. And our pie pumpkins did pretty well this year. We grew 2 varieties and got quite a few. So we'll be in pies this year. No problem with that. But other than that, it was, I would say, a mediocre year. That wet early summer really increased the weeds, and, of course, the bugs took off after that. So we've had some challenges managing that. But, overall, we still got food, and that's always a plus. And as a gardener, everything is sort of you learn what you learn this year, then you apply it to next year or future years. And so we did learn a lot. So it's never a total loss. Our growing season is never a total loss. We'll always get something. It just wasn't as robust as in previous years.
Janet, that's a bit of an inspiration for the listeners because we have a lot of novice gardeners. I still consider myself a novice gardener, and you get so emotionally invested in the spring. And even with your experience, your tomatoes were just the pits, and that's the way it is.
Yeah. And that's the way it is. And I think that, I too believe that I am still learning. I think, we're really digging into cover crops now to solve some of those issues in that back plot. And I am at the very front end of learning about cover crops and how to manage them and how they impact your soil health. But, I didn't bump into them. I mean, I knew about them in the agricultural world, but really not much. I didn't know many folks using them in the gardening world. And so just this year we really started to dig into that. And I look forward to implementing some of those techniques and methods. But took me 30 years. I've been gardening for 30 years, and it took me that long to even think about how to impact my soil health, which impacts all kinds of other things, as you know, weeds and plant virility and yield and all kinds of stuff. And so I am always trying to learn. And I think from a beginner standpoint, that something to remember is a garden isn't built in one season. And so it's really a lifetime of learning and applying that to next season. There's a reason why gardeners always talk about next season, right? So we're tinkering around with a lot to figure out how to get better production out of that plot, but it's something I didn't know 5 years ago.
Your soggy acre gave you tomatillos, but no tomatoes.
A handful of tomatoes, a handful. I mean, we had enough for like BLTs. I think we did a couple rounds of canned tomatoes. Usually we're giving away tomatoes. We didn't give any away this year.
Wow. Let's shift gears, because this is what I was so excited that I got to talk to you about, was the canning, because you're brilliant at it, and you share you share everything on your blog.
I try to.
jansjars.blogspot.com. I bookmarked it. I'm going to put it up on the site now, because my wife's been canning for a long time, but this is the first season I got into canning. I got to participate. And I wonder if you could share with the listeners who are afraid or nervous about canning, how do you recommend a student get started in canning?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I would encourage folks to buy a Ball Blue book, actually, and I am not a representative of Ball in any way, but it's maybe $10. It's a small investment, but that has step-by-step instructions as well as vetted recipes, and those two things are really important to beginners. I think a mistake that some folks make early on is they go online and browse the internet and find canning recipes. Many of those are not vetted. And so it's really, it doesn't have to be the Ball Blue book. You could go to a USDA site. You could go to your county extension site. Anything that's associated with the university would be great, but just find those recipes, because all those recipes really go back to acid levels in the food, and they're vetted in a lab to make sure that those are safe. And so there's really no way to tell by looking at food if it's safe. Even a sealed jar can be unsafe. What you want to do is make sure you use the right recipe. So get a book or go online to USDA and browse the steps to get started and familiar. And then Extension typically has somebody on staff who can help you with that. I'm available via Twitter or my blog, but find someone knowledgeable to help you through those steps if you're uncomfortable sort of just jumping in. It's not hard. It's really not hard, but there's some steps you just have to pay attention to. And so sometimes, just like with gardening, if you can find someone who's been through it, it makes it a lot easier. Yeah,
the science element. There is science involved, folks, and a little bit of investment. But that investment will pay back year after year, won't it, Janet?
It will. There's definitely... for a beginner, you don't have to invest a whole lot. A canner, doesn't cost, $25 or $30 for a water bath canner. Mm-hmm. And your jars are reusable. And so the investment is early on, but then you can reuse those jars every year. So we do it not just to extend the food budget, but also to really extend the harvest. And so I love having fresh food and going out to the garden and picking fresh food. I really love eating it in winter. There's something really awesome about a fresh local peach on Christmas morning. And so those are experiences that are important to me to have all year round, is to be able to enjoy that food.
You said peach. We had a devastating winter, like an ice storm. And I think you got some of that polar vortex too. And
absolutely.
Our peaches were dismal this year. And now I want peaches.
For the first time ever, our peach crop, I could not find any, in Central Ohio anyway, any growers that still had peaches this year. And so for the first time ever, I preserved out-of-state peaches, which is, my whole family is recoiling.
Yeah, blasphemy.
They're delicious peaches. They're delicious peaches. Seriously, they're so tasty. But it just goes to show you that you can't always rely on getting tomatoes or getting peaches, depending on the growing season.
We made over 100 jars, my wife and I, this year.
That's awesome.
And I didn't know until we actually did a count, and like salsa. And then because we started off with 22 kinds of tomatoes this year, and we have raised beds, so I think even though we had a really wet July, we did okay for drainage.
Good.
But then we got the hot peach salsa, and then we got into the pickled peppers and the pickled carrots, and just you get carried away. It's a slippery soap.
It is. It's addicting.
Have you done any work with the pressure canners?
I have. That's really, I encourage folks to start off with water bath and get comfortable and then move on to a pressure canner. But yes, if you're going to do low acid foods, that is anything that's not pickled, or any vegetables that aren't pickled or brined or in a sugar syrup, that you need to actually pressure can those. And those two are not interchangeable. So once you find your recipes, you'll find that it'll recommend either water bath or pressure. And that's really not interchangeable. You need to really follow those instructions. Now, it's a little more investment. The pressure canner is a little more expensive. But again, you've got limited freezer space. You might have limited shelf space. And so you need to decide how you're going to manage the harvest. In addition to what we grow, we also buy a half beef and a half of pork. And so sometimes when our freezer is up to the top, and I still need to shove in Christmas cookies here in a couple months, we'll preserve some of that meat through canning. And so it's actually a quick dinner because the meat is so tender. And there's lots of ways to use that meat. So folks really need to decide where they're going to store their extra food, how much space they have, and how much they want to invest.
Fantastic. Yeah. I've been lugging like jars of vinegar and then the big jugs of distilled water all summer. And I said, when are we going to make stews and soups? And she goes, oh no, that's a whole new level. You're not ready for that.
Well, it is a different level. And again, there's a science involved, and you just have to follow the directions. But it can be done. And I know folks often have a story about their grandmother's canner exploding. New canners do not explode. And so there's really no reason to fear it. There's no reason to fear pressure canning. Directions are readily available, and it's a safe thing to do in your kitchen, even with your kids in the kitchen.
For those of you driving along, make sure you follow Janet on Twitter at Janet Cassidy. And then check out jansjars.blogspot.com. And I've been taking notes as we've been talking, Janet, and I wrote down new canners do not explode. And so I'll put that in the show notes. That's good news.
Yeah. One thing I want to say, if folks still have canners that have wing nuts on the side, I'm sure everyone knows what I'm talking about. There's actual wing nuts that you screw down the side. Get rid of that canner and get a new one without wing nuts. There's
this new thing called Craigslist, and trade it for a canoe or lawn furniture. Just trade it. Yeah. Very
right.
Good. What do you do you have an obsession's the wrong word, or a passion? What do you love to can yourself?
So I mentioned peaches before. It's really important. I don't know if it's sort of what we grew up on or what, but it's very important to us to have peaches as a family. I don't know where that links back to, but somewhere in the past, that was what we did, was can peaches. And so it feels like every year we've got to can peaches. But I am interested in foods that make mealtime prep easier. So I'm very interested in creating or preserving food that, for instance, I can use as sides, so applesauce or salsa or pickled beets, something that I can open quick and I can have a ready-made side. Or even canned tomatoes that'll help me get, say, chili going really fast or a spaghetti sauce going really fast. And so I am very interested in convenience foods via canning. I don't, if it's hard to put in the jar and hard to use outside the jar, I probably will not do it. It's got to be helpful to me and my lifestyle. And so even if everyone's busy, and our 5 o'clocks are crunch time. That's, I think, true of everybody. And so I want to be able to come home, even if I forgot to pull something out of the freezer that morning, a piece of meat. I can even pull out, say, burgers or sausage patties, throw those on the grill, do a quick roasted vegetable, because we have lots of vegetables that we hold. So, for instance, our squash we can hold for several months. I can put a squash in the oven and roast that real quick and serve pickled beets with it, or applesauce might be a better choice. And so I've got a great meal homemade in a half an hour, which is really what I strive for, really good homemade food in a half an hour. Fantastic. Doesn't always happen, but that's what I shoot for.
Now, listeners, if you turned up your nose at pickled beets, you don't know what you're missing. Just try it once. All these vegetables we hated as kids now, as grown-ups.
You're right.
These are good.
I guess I didn't realize how many beet haters there were out there until I started talking about pickled beets. And so there's a real divide among beet lovers and beet haters that I just recently became aware of. And so, yes, I think that's right. I think that's good advice for everyone. If you tried something when you were young and it came out of a commercial can, and you didn't like it, try it again. I think that's true of peas and Brussels sprouts and asparagus and beets. If you only ever ate those things commercially canned, you might like it more than you think you do.
For those of you who are listening to this or thinking about getting into this, remember that canned goodies are a currency. I trade my pickled beans to my friend Rick, who owns a nano brewery and makes beer. And
nice.
So, he's addicted to pickled beans, and I enjoy his homemade beer. So it's a win-win.
That's an awesome trade.
I'm actually a little bit nervous. We made pickled peppers.
Okay.
And I grew a Naga Viper, which is the third hottest pepper. And it's 1 million Scoville, like a ghost pepper.
Oh, my.
And we had the goggles and the hazmat suits on when we were cutting it up, and doors were open, and the cat wouldn't come upstairs because the cat said, "You guys are crazy." Yeah, and so there's liquid fire in that. It's going to be good.
Sounds hot.
I've been looking at the time rapidly going by, Janet, and now's the time in the show where we play a game called 5 Quick Questions. This is your chance to share your wisdom and experience with novice gardeners. Are you ready to play?
I am.
Question number 1. What do you think stops most people from getting into gardening? And we can add that one, canning and food preserving as well.
Yeah, I think probably the answer is the same for both, which is I think folks think they have to know everything there is to know about that particular thing before they start it. In the case of gardening, seeds are cheap, and really that's how I got started. Seeds are cheap. And so to buy a packet of seeds and to scratch up some earth and plant the seeds really gives you sort of a confidence of growing something. And I think that really gets you started. In the case of canning, people still believe that if it's done wrong, they'll kill their family, which is not untrue. It never happens. It seriously never happens. And you could not kill your family with a jar of water bath food that is a high-acid product. You cannot kill your family with a high-acid product. And so there's folks who will help you. You don't need to be perfect at it to start. It is, both are big sort of subject topics to get your arms around, but that doesn't mean you have to know everything there is to know to get started. You don't have to see the top of the staircase to put your foot on the first step.
Whoa, that's wisdom.
And so it's really okay not to be able to see the top when you're just on the bottom. It's really okay. Just keep going. Just try it.
Nice. In 30 years of gardening, Janet, did you ever plant something that didn't grow?
Oh, yeah, for sure. We love tinkering around with things that aren't really appropriate for this part of the world. So, when we travel to southern Ohio, we're very taken by tobacco, believe it or not, how it grows and how it looks. So one year we tried, not to sell it, we just wanted to see if it would grow here. We tried tobacco and it grew here, and it's just so interesting and so cool, and nothing like what we would typically grow. We've also tried peanuts. So here we are in, central Ohio, and we tried peanuts. Couldn't get those to grow. We have a hard time with edamame. So definitely, I think that's sort of the fun of it, is stretching, right? And seeing if you can grow something that maybe isn't exactly perfect, or isn't in your skill set, or isn't in your knowledge base. And there's things that surprised us. So definitely, I don't consider those failures. I just consider that sort of a fun gardening exercise.
I'm so glad you're on this episode. You're fantastic. I'm learning. I have half a page of notes here. When you said edamame, my head snapped up like, what? That's great. Number 2. I love
edamame, and I realize so do the rabbits. Having said that, we've recently got a little pack of coyotes living off in the farm field behind us. And we don't have any pets, so I'm not worried about them getting carried away. But those coyote, I think, have taken care of that bunny problem, and we might try it again next year, because I love edamame.
When you said coyote, we actually just bought some coyote and mountain lion spray for my wife's parents' garden. The squirrels have devastated it, and they don't have a dog or a gun. And so I saw a black squirrel come down out of a tree, grab a hot pepper off the vine, take 2 bites, throw it aside, and went back up the tree.
Well, hopefully he learned a lesson.
And my mother-in-law is, an elderly Greek woman, and she comes out and starts yelling at the squirrels in Greek. It's just priceless.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so maybe the coyote spray will keep the squirrels away next season.
Yeah.
Oh, question 2. What's the best gardening advice that you've ever received?
That would be, you have to grow it to know it. There is definitely, you can read up on all kinds of, there's so much information available, especially online now on gardening and plants in particular. But you don't really know how a plant's going to act until it's growing in your garden. And there's a reason why there's recommendations. I typically plant things way too close. I'm a space hoarder. I shove probably way too much in, and then I thin, and then I feel bad because I'm ripping out seedlings. And you don't know a plant until you grow it. But then you might know a whole host of plants because you grew this one plant. And so really, I think growing the plant will help and that's really been great advice to me is to there's not much to lose when you're putting a plant in the ground, so put it in and see how it goes, and then you'll know it.
Dynamite. Number 3 is a recommendation. We've been telling people check out your blog at jansjars.blogspot.com. Can you recommend a couple of websites for novice gardeners, maybe other blogs or resources online that you like?
Yeah, there's for the newbies especially. I recommend the USDA site first off to figure out what zone you're in. So as you're thinking about a garden, not that you can't grow plants that are outside your zone, you just have to think about them not living through the winter. And so that's helpful in terms of planning your garden. But also, I really think your extension agent and the extension websites are awesome and sometimes overlooked. Just the volume of white papers on those sites is amazing, and it's really the first place that I go to for like bug identification or better understanding cycles of bugs. There's so much you can do if you know the cycle of the bug, and this is really something I just learned like the last 5 years, how to break those cycles of insects. And so there's so much research-based information at extension sites that that's really someplace I typically go. And the good news is, if I can't find it, I can also pick up the phone and call extension in the office.
Nice. Oh, just curious, Janet, what zone are you in mid-Ohio?
I'm in 6A.
6A, okay. So you're not growing bananas and...
I'm not. I wish I could grow lemon trees. I think that's my one big desire is to have citrus we lost our fig tree this past year to that polar vortex, and some peach trees. But that was an experiment, that fig tree, and I thought it was gonna work. I'm hoping it was just an anomaly because it got down so cold. I think we might try it again because I love figs. So there are definitely tropical foods that I want. I typically just have to go to the grocery store for those.
We got a fig tree this year, and I didn't know. My wife bought it, and it's become a roommate. It is going to live in the house.
No.
Yeah.
We have seriously talked about planting trees in pots and rolling them in and out of the house. I just don't know if I'm there yet, but I do love citrus. I would love a lime now and again, but geez, I'm not sure I can manage a tree in the house.
I understand. I had to move my golf clubs, and now Mr. Fig lives where my golf clubs were.
Well, priorities, I guess, yeah. Right?
Well, that's right. There is a payoff in the summer with the fruit.
Absolutely.
Question 4. Can you recommend one of your favorite gardening books?
I can. So I actually have 2 that are my favorites. And one is, I think, a little-known book, or maybe not, called Back to Basics. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And it's a whole book, everything from how to build a barn to how to lay a brick patio to, I think there's even hog butchering in that book. I don't consider myself a homesteader, but I sure do love folks that have those skills. And so there is a section on canning and drying, but even, windmills and electricity. It's really for how to manage your property book. And I think it's pretty wide ranging in the topics and what falls under that. So it's very old school. It was actually put out by Reader's Digest. That probably means folks won't read it. But I sometimes find myself just leafing through that book, or when I have a problem, even soap making, I think, is in that book. I try to just sort of look through that book to first get an idea if the project is bigger than what I can manage. And then I sometimes go to other resources if I want to continue with the project. And my second book is the Ball Blue book. I already mentioned that. And so that's really a great primer to get you started in canning and dehydrating and freezing. It really covers all 3 of those in terms of how to preserve your garden. So it's a good first step to go to if you're thinking about preserving.
Outstanding. Oh, and finally, question number 5, Janet, is a fun one. What's the number one thing that you would recommend every gardener should try to grow next season? Or what's something that you've been just waiting to experiment with and you're going to try it next year?
Well, I think every gardener should grow herbs. I'm all about the food, and herbs are pretty hardy, and they can be grown in the ground or in containers or in raised beds, really anywhere. And they add a lot of complexity and depth to your meals. And so they smell nice, they look nice, and they're easy to grow. And so I always encourage new gardeners to start with herbs. In terms of what we're doing next year, we might actually get a hoop house. And we've been thinking about this for several years now. And I think we're ready to take the plunge. So, with me later, see how that goes. But if I could even get 3 more months out of the growing season, I think about all the things that we could have for those 3 more months. And then I also think that, a step towards the hoop house is also eventually a step towards the greenhouse, which is really what I'm gunning for. Then I can get my lime tree. So we'll see how that goes, but we're looking into it right now, what that would take.
How exciting. Very good. That would be nice. Tell them Dave says you need it. It's a write-off anyhow.
I will.
Yeah,
I will.
That's good. Our time has flown by.
It has.
I want to encourage all the listeners. I hope you got a lot out of this show. I took a lot of notes. And follow Janet on Twitter at Janet Cassidy. And for sure, bookmark her site, share it with the world at www.jansjars.blogspot.com. Janet, you've been an incredible guest.
Oh, thank you.
I want to give you the last word to the listeners. Can you leave them with either a pearl of wisdom or a note of encouragement?
Sure. I think, I actually go out and do judging at county fairs of canned goods, and I think the encouragement really is practice, practice, practice. So find your passion, and then even if you can, commit to doing it once a week, the way you get better at something is practice. And I'm still practicing, and I think what you said. And so no one should expect perfection after one season or one try at something. And so really identify what it is and then just practice, and have fun.
Wonderful. You've been a brilliant guest. Thanks for being on the show, Janet.
Thanks for having me.